Picture this. You're camping alone in the freezing mountains. The temperature is hovering way, way below zero, and the wind is just absolutely screaming through the darkness right outside your shelter. Now, imagine something out there terrifies you so profoundly, so deeply, that every ounce of rational thought you have just completely vanishes. You cut your way out and run into the snow barefoot. Look, this isn't some crazy scene from a horror movie. This is the actual chilling reality of the Dyatlov Pass Mystery. It's a true story that still completely baffles the world well over 60 years later. In today's Explainer, we're going to reconstruct this whole bizarre event, stepping back in time to trace exactly how a group went from capable, experienced survivalists to victims of absolute panic.
All right, let's start with Section 1. The expedition begins.
So the number 9 is really central to our story here. We're talking about a group of 9 highly experienced hikers from the Soviet Union, and they set off on an expedition through the incredibly harsh northern Ural Mountains. They were led by a young student named Igor Dyatlov. And I really want to emphasize this point. These folks were not amateurs, not even close. Every single one of them was a skilled hiker who had already survived brutal mountain expeditions. Their goal was to cross a really dangerous snowy region, which, yeah, was absolutely supposed to be challenging, but it was definitely not supposed to be deadly.
Before they headed out in 1959, the group promised they'd send a message back home as soon as they successfully finished the trek. But, you guessed it, that expected message never came. Days ticked by, then weeks. Their families naturally became deeply, deeply worried. And that agonizing silence finally triggered a massive response, with rescue teams being sent straight into those freezing, unforgiving mountains to track them down.
Moving on to Section 2, a bizarre discovery. Okay, so the rescue party eventually finds the campsite. It's partially buried beneath the snow, and right away, something just feels horribly, incredibly wrong. The tent had literally been ripped open from the inside out. I mean, it looked as if the hikers had desperately needed to escape their shelter in complete panic. But you have to ask yourself, why would a group of highly trained survivalists willfully destroy their only protection from the elements? And even weirder, a ton of their shoes, warm jackets, and essential gear were left completely untouched inside the tent. Why on earth would they run out into a deadly snowstorm half-dressed?
Which brings us to Section 3, tracking the panic. We can actually trace this terrifying physical progression. Step 1, they pitch their tent, doing exactly what competent survivalists do. But step 2 is where things go off the rails. Something causes them to slice the tent open from the inside, marking this sudden crazy shift to blind panic. Step 3 is super chilling. Investigators found footprints showing several hikers had moved through the snow completely barefoot. But here's the catch. The tracks showed they were walking. They didn't run, they walked barefoot for almost 1.5 kilometers away from the tent. That points to a massive level of disorientation. And finally, step 4. Rescuers found the first bodies huddled beneath a tree, wearing very little clothing, but right nearby, they had managed to build a small fire. So even in that disoriented, freezing state, there was this final desperate attempt just to survive.
Let's look at Section 4, unexplainable injuries. You've got to look at the stark contrast between a typical freezing death and what they actually found up on that mountain. Usually, with severe hypothermia, investigators expect to find intact bodies with pretty minimal physical trauma. But instead, they found absolutely bizarre anomalies. One hiker had a completely crushed skull. Another had severe chest fractures, impacts so incredibly powerful that investigators literally compared them to the kind of trauma you'd get in a high-speed car crash. One woman was even found missing her tongue. And strangely enough, many of these bodies showed almost zero external wounds. It was almost as if some kind of invisible force had just crushed them from the inside out. Oh, and to add to the absolute strangeness of it all, some of their clothing reportedly showed traces of radiation. Naturally, these impossible anomalies just sent the rumor mill into overdrive. Witnesses in nearby towns even claimed they saw these glowing orange lights moving across the sky that very night. So people started asking all sorts of questions. Were they attacked by military forces? Was it some sort of secret weapons experiment? Was it something not human at all? Now, the more grounded theories suggested an avalanche had simply forced them to flee, but a lot of the initial investigators actually argued that the physical evidence left on the mountain didn't fully line up with an avalanche disaster. This perfectly sets up Section 5, extreme wind and panic. Well, here is where the science gets really fascinating. Some scientists and investigators point to a terrifying natural phenomenon.
You see, powerful winds can sometimes interact with mountain topography in a way that creates these specific low-frequency sound waves. These acoustic waves can biologically induce severe, unexplainable dread and completely irrational panic in the human brain. Think about that for a second. The environment itself essentially weaponizes sound against you.
So the absolutely crucial point here is this. Extreme weather phenomena, specifically these powerful winds creating panic-inducing sound frequencies, might actually perfectly bridge the gap in our mystery. It scientifically explains how completely rational, highly experienced hikers could suddenly have their core survival instincts just totally shattered. It explains the biological, overwhelming terror required to make a seasoned outdoorsman slice open his own shelter and walk barefoot into lethal, freezing darkness. The mountain didn't just freeze them, you guys. It literally terrified them to death.
And finally, Section 6, the lingering mystery.
Despite all the theories, the Soviet government eventually had to close the investigation, and they closed it with this incredibly vague, deeply unsettling official conclusion. They simply stated that the hikers died because of an unknown compelling force, and that was it. For decades, that complete lack of a definitive answer only deepened the fear and the myths surrounding the event. That abandoned stretch of the mountain was later named Dyatlov Pass in memory of Igor Dyatlov, but only silence ever came back from those snowbanks.
Somewhere deep within the freezing mountains of Russia, the total truth is still waiting, hidden beneath all that ice and darkness. I want to leave you all with this final thought. Was it truly some inexplicable, unknown, compelling force that destroyed them? Or was it simply the terrifying, invisible reality of extreme nature pushing the human mind way past its breaking point? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and as always, keep questioning the unknown.